The left's narrative is that white people are bad and black people are good, and all black people are good and all white people are bad, and the greatest scourge, the most pervasive evil in the country is white supremacy. And so the George Floyd event, the George Floyd killing, didn't fit that narrative, but they made it fit that narrative. George Floyd became this innocent guy who was doing absolutely nothing wrong, and the officer became a vicious white supremacist, even though there was really no evidence of that. And so it fit that narrative, whereas what happened in Waukesha doesn't fit that narrative. Because the guy there, just looking at his social media, appears to hate white people. He espouses black nationalist rhetoric, Hebrew Israelite rhetoric. That's the kooky group that believes that black people are the real Jews and the Jews are evil. And according to the evidence that we have, he was swerving to hit people with his car. He wasn't trying to avoid them. He was actually gunning to hit people. So that narrative doesn't fit, and so he's not going to show up. And a lot of politicians don't want to talk about it because the minute that you suggest that the left's narrative on race or sex or whatever isn't correct, you're accused of being a bigot or a racist or a phobe or whatever stupid word they're going to call you. And so a lot of politicians, even Republicans, don't want to touch it. They say, better just to sit back here and let's just move on and let's just ignore it. One politician who's not just going to ignore it, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis.
Is that how it works? The SUVs, they just drive by themselves? This just kind of happened? And they say, this was a big accident. You never actually hear the discussion about who committed this, what was the motivation. This guy was a career criminal, let out on, didn't really have any bail, basically, should not have even been on the street, had clear anti-white animus, and this was an intentional act. And it seems like, for corporate press, they're more apt to characterize a parent who goes to a school board meeting to protest bad policies as a domestic terrorist than somebody who intentionally rams an SUV into a crowd of innocent people. And we'll see what the actual motivation was. It very well may have been in response to what happened with Kyle Rittenhouse. And you have to wonder if that's the case. Almost assuredly, this guy's view of Rittenhouse was colored by all these media lies.
This press conference was basically perfect. It was written, if you had the most sophisticated Hollywood / Washington, D.C. writer to hit every single point you need to hit, he probably couldn't have done a better job than what you just saw there in that press conference. DeSantis is getting the attack for what it was. He's demonstrating the courage to talk about it, to talk about crime, first of all. A lot of Republicans now are running away from talking about crime. They want to talk about criminal justice reform and letting the criminals out of prison, up to and including Donald Trump, who did that. I love Donald Trump, but even he made a big legislative effort to let criminals out of prison. DeSantis is saying, no, we need to put more criminals in prison. Should never have been out in the first place. He's demonstrating the courage to talk about the left's crazy racial narratives. He's saying, look, this is an anti-white crime by all evidence that we've got. We always talk about anti-blackness in our culture, but we never talk about anti-white discrimination and bigotry. And he's willing to talk about that. So again, you're not supposed to touch that. That's not what the establishment wants you to talk about. DeSantis is willing to do it. And then most important of all, beyond the crime and beyond the left's kooky racial narratives, he's putting it all in the media. He's saying, we'll find out what the motivation was here, but if the motivation was something to do with Kenosha and Kyle Rittenhouse, then the media bears some culpability here. Because the media presented a narrative to unhinged freaks like this guy in Waukesha who probably believed the narrative that Kyle Rittenhouse was a terrible white supremacist and this was a racial attack and it was just BS from the media. But freaks like the guy in Waukesha aren't going to know that. And so what DeSantis is saying is this crime lives within a context of media corruption. He opens up talking about the corporate media. He closes talking about the corporate media. Really smart. The other thing that DeSantis does here that's really clever is injects himself into the story. Why is the governor of Florida talking about a crime that took place in Wisconsin? Why? How does he do that? I get why he would talk about coronavirus, and he's been kind of the leading voice among governors on coronavirus. But how is he going to inject himself into this story in Wisconsin? Well, he's holding a press conference about how Florida supports law enforcement. All right, so that's something that a governor could do. We support law enforcement. It was obviously an opportunity. It was bait for the media to show up, and then he can smack the media down on this story in Wisconsin, because it would seem clear to me that Governor DeSantis is eyeing the presidency. It's very clever stuff. He's right on the issue, but he's also playing a pretty clever game in terms of setting himself up to run for president. Now, if Donald Trump runs for president again, probably that's dead on arrival. Probably he clears the field. But if not, he's positioning himself pretty well for a guy who was relatively unknown a couple of years ago. Glad you liked that clip. Hold up. Ring that bell. Ring it. Ring it, then you'll get the notifications. And actually, sometimes you won't get the notifications because our dear friends at Big Tech don't always love to give our subscribers the notifications. That's why you got to go over to Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, Google Play. Subscribe to The Michael Knowles Show. MICHAEL, KNWLES, SHOW. Subscribe, leave a 5-star review. We'll see you next time.